Welcome to this high-level side event on good governance, democracy, and the rule of law in the post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda. And it is an honor to have this wonderful group with us whom I will introduce one by one when they speak rather than all together. My name is Raghida Dargham. I am the Bureau Chief of Al-Haya here at the United Nations. I also have founded something in the Arab region called Beirut Institute that hopes to build up on this issue and the matter of building democratic processes for their decision to be multiple and not one-sided and in one person. So it is my honor to introduce as first speaker. Here's how we're going to do this. We're going to introduce Mr. Eliasson and the two ministers at the beginning. They will engage with each other simply because they have time restraints. And then we will have some exchange of questions and answers together. And then thereafter, we will bring in the rest of the panel only because of the time restraint that will oblige Mr. Eliasson to leave. And let me, with this, introduce Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations since July 2012, lucky us. He served as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden, President of the 60th session of the General Assembly, and previously as Sweden's ambassador to the USA and PR to the UN. And he was also the Secretary General's personal representative for Iran and Iraq. And it is my honor to say that he's been a personal friend of mine for over 30 years. So, Mr. Eliasson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Darghida. Your last comment reminds me that in your case it must have been a serious case of child labor. Not for me, though. Minister Skelemani of Botswana and Minister Brenda of Norway, Secretary General of IDEA, Yves Le Terme, distinguished panelists and distinguished moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, great to be with you. And I thank Botswana, Norway, and IDEA for organizing this high-level side event to the General Assembly General Debate. And I salute your country's commitment to good governance, democracy, and the rule of law. This meeting comes at an important moment in history. We are in the final stretch towards the closing of the MDGs, and we have a year to forge a bold and ambitious post-2015 development agenda. It is not an exaggeration to say, I would say, that the MDGs constitute the most successful anti-poverty campaign in history. At the same time, new challenges have emerged. Inequality is on the rise. Conflicts are increasingly tangled with sectarian hatred, organized crime, and acts of terrorism. The potential of popular discontent and vulnerability, often caused by effects of climate change, such as floods, drought, and soaring food prices, tend to trigger social unrest and violence. These new challenges have been taken into account in an extensive consultation to define the post-2015 development agenda. The SG, Ban Ki-moon, and the General Assembly have received valuable proposals from the Open Working Group on Sustainable Development Goals, also from the Committee of Experts on Sustainable Development Financing and the Structured Dialogues on Technology. Inputs have also been received on an unprecedented scale from civil society, the private sector, young people, women's groups, legislators, and many other stakeholders, many of you here today. Almost 5 million people all over the world have expressed their views through the consultations and what we call the My World survey. And of course now, the next stage for us, the Secretary General and myself and Amina Mohammed, who is here. Where are you, Amina? Oh, you're on the panel. That's the best of you. We will, of course, then have the obligation to produce a synthesis report at the end of the year, which we hope will be a good contribution to the negotiations starting next year, where, of course, the SDGs working groups input is a very important basis for the talks. Now, as member states embark on the final year negotiations, now is a good moment to pause and reflect on why people from all regions of the world ranked honest and responsive government as their third priority, right after health and education. Think about this. I'm convinced that people understand that good governance, democracy, the rule of law, and not least well-functioning institutions are critical for development, and they understand what accountability means in practice. This intuition, I would say this common sense of people around the world, matches a key lesson learned from the MDGs. Weak governance, ineffective or unfair justice and security institutions, and lack of stability are barriers to development progress everywhere. Where the rule of law is not firmly established, poverty and marginalization is exacerbated. People around the world want honest, responsive, and effective governments that deliver public services without discrimination, without exclusion or corruption. They expect authorities to manage natural resources sustainably and fairly, and people everywhere long for peace, security, and respect for human rights. Several governments are leading the way by developing governance and rule of law targets and indicators and incorporating them in their national development plans. Over the last 15 years, there has been an increase in the demand for support to help countries establish inclusive governance, strengthen the rule of law, and assist countries emerging from conflict. The UN has tried to answer this call. We are helping national authorities to build social cohesion and mechanisms for dialogue. We are empowering people to exercise their rights and seek redress and obtain basic services. This work has clearly proven that governance and the rule of law are critical enablers of progress and important development outcomes in their own right. The experiences of member states, regional organizations, and civil society provide a strong basis for refining targets and developing indicators in this area for the post-2015 development agenda. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, the General Assembly has repeatedly affirmed that democracy, good governance, and the rule of law are essential for sustainable development and the eradication of poverty. Member States have also repeatedly stated that effective, transparent, accountable, and democratic institutions are needed for sustainable development. The Open Working Group's proposal for the goals, the next generation goals, includes a goal on peaceful and inclusive societies, access to justice for all, and effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. The targets that are proposed address critical areas such as reduction of violence, corruption, and organized crime, and representative decision-making. Governance is about more than building institutions. It is about empowering people to engage with decision makers and institutions and to hold them accountable. When the poorest and the most vulnerable secure their rights, have access to legal protection, and participate in decision making, then they will drive progress in their communities and our world. And institutions, and what I've just been saying is also not a guarantee, but it's an element that makes more certain that we hold on to the goals that we decide upon. It gives a stability and structure to our work, and I hope very much that the member states will retain that extremely qualitative value of the work ahead. And governance in this broader context will be an important driver of progress across all dimensions of the next global development agenda. And that agenda must be truly transformative and people-centered. Rule of law, governance, and solid institutions underpinned by respect of human rights will be central to achieving a life of dignity for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eliasson. I look forward to asking you a couple of questions about this involvement and engagement of the people, particularly after the march yesterday for climate change, which was rather impressive. And I think the UN has played a real lead role in making that happen. So we'll get to that as we go on with this conversation this morning. And it's my honor to introduce His Excellency, the Honorable Fandus Kelemani, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Botswana, a member of the parliament since 2003 and Attorney General of the Republic, a position he ascended to in 1992. So he knows the rule of law and he knows governance, and we look forward to hearing his presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Deputy Secretary General, the panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I often wonder whether when we speak about good governance, the rule of law, or human rights, we really are talking about the same thing. And where exactly do you start? Is it a chicken and egg? Do you have good governance alone? Can you have democracy without the rule of law? And can you have a rule of law without democracy and good governance? Or is it a melting pot? In practice, I think you'll find that if you do not have institutions, properly run institutions in a country, independent institutions with authority to do what is assigned to them, you're not going to get very far. Most of the time, my observation is that there's a lot of intolerance. The inability to realize that whereas I have certain demands, certain things which I want, I ought to realize that my neighbor also has certain demands, certain things which he or she wants. And in governance, good governance, is the management of this conflict. How do you manage this conflict? And so you can imagine a situation where institutions have been set up by an executive which then totally ignores what those institutions decide or say. The result is total nonsense. You can set up the high courts, the ombudsman, if you then have an executive which ignores these institutions. It's no use, you are not going to have good governance. That's why I was saying, are we not talking about chicken and egg? Which comes first? Of these things. The rule of law to me is something which is very annoying. When you appreciate it for what it is, you must reach a stage where you then say, I really don't like him.
What?
I don't like him. I don't like her. But you know what? This belongs to him. I am obliged to give to him. Much as I really don't like, I wish I could give it to somebody else. When you have the ability to separate your own personal from that which belongs to the other person, that is the rule of law. It can't be something imaginary. And until you have practiced it, you may not really appreciate the depth of it. But to me, that is what it is. But for democracy to function, in a way, you got to grow it. You can't just impose it by having rules, by passing pieces of legislation. It must be grown. And as you know, I come from Africa. And that's the continent I know best. Where I can then say, we lack tolerance, we lack the give and take, so that even when there are institutions, we ignore them. Because the judgments which come out, we don't like them. So as an executive, we do something else. And so we fail the people. But for democracy to function, we also need civil society, informed civil society, to participate. Freedom of information, for them to know what the government is doing, for them to be critical, and for government to listen. Government may not like what they say, but then you're not there to like things. You're there to run a country properly for the benefit of the people, and you must listen to the people. You will see that I'm not reading a text because I prefer to speak my mind. The way I see it, admitting, realizing that I may actually be wrong in what I say, but I will insist until you convince me that I'm wrong. And if you do, I'll graciously accept and take your advice. But until you do that, I'll insist in my ways, which may be wrong. And so, we then must be careful how we go about it. We are pleased that we have joined Norway in this important event. And I also want to take this opportunity to commend the co-chairs of the Open Working Group on Sustainable Development Goals for their excellent work in the formulation of Sustainable Development Goals, because the post-2015 agenda is very important. But it will succeed only if we have good governance, the rule of law. Those are fundamentals. If we don't, we are in trouble.
Thank
Well,
you.
time is our enemy.
Yes. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you very
Minister.
much.
I
Thank you.
appreciate your cooperation. I thank you, Mr. Minister. I would like to introduce now His Excellency Mr. Borge Brende. He is Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway. He has been Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party from 1994 to 1998 and a member of the Norwegian Parliament for more than 10 years. He was previously Minister of the Environment and Minister of Trade, and I know him in his capacity as Managing Director of the World Economic Forum in Geneva, and this is where I had the honor of building a friendship with you at Davos. Please, Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Deputy Secretary General Dorian, fellow Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 500,000 citizens of 194 countries have participated in the online survey, My World, sponsored by the UN. they were asked to rank their priorities for their countries. What is most important? Among the top 3, they chose an honest and responsive government. As we prepare for what should replace the MDGs with the Sustainable Development Goals, I think we should take this into account. An honest and responsive government. We know there is clear correlation between good governance and a lot of other positive things that we want to see in the society. My fellow minister, my colleague, mentioned some of them, and I think we also know very much that with good governance, poverty eradication, and also empowering important groups in the society follows. The aim of this meeting today is to build common ground on this issue of good governance in the post-2015 framework. This is a central building block to break the cycle of poverty and promote economic growth. We need sustainable development goals that can mobilize public opinion and political leaders in a global effort to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. And as the Deputy Secretary General mentioned, the MDGs have been very impactful, very consequential, and we know that before 2015, we are in a situation where we halved the amount of people living in extreme poverty. And it could be done again. This time, our overall aim is to eradicate all extreme poverty by 2030. And in my view, in Norway's view, one of the building blocks also have to be good governance. According to what people also made a priority for themselves when they responded to this survey. Good governance and the rule of law are crucial to economic growth and investment and to peace and stability. For instance, according to African Union estimates, 25% of African GDP is spent on bribery. Thus, transparency promotes innovation, investment, and growth because it reduces corruption and bribery. Secondly, good governance at the national level is critical at the global level. It is needed for the international community to deal with poverty, climate change, and global public goods. Thirdly, respect for human rights is fundamental to reduce poverty. For example, the equal rights of girls to an education is essential to ensure inclusive economic growth, job creation, and a fair distribution of income. The respondents of the My World survey do not only, I think, reflect on economic growth when they rank their priorities. They also desire dignity and freedom. We need to create the conditions for this to be possible for all citizens in all countries. Norway believes that good governance deserves a stand-alone goal focused on democratic development, human rights, and the rule of law. This will be now an important part of the follow-up of the Open Working Group's work. We will have the synthesis report from the Secretary General and from Jan now in the fall, and we will have important process where we create ownership to the new SDGs in the course of the spring. We will have a meeting in Ethiopia, Addis, where we decide on what is needed on the financial side. And I think we also have to make clear commitments on development and ODA and have a successful kind of replication of the Monterrey meeting in Addis. This is the lead-in to the GA in September, where I hope we can agree on the most consequential, impactful SDGs for the coming 15 years. And part of them, I strongly hope we will be able to also address good governance. Good governance is a natural part of future-orientated, ambitious goals when we are discussing what kind of world we want to work for in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Let me start with asking the three of you a question related to a part of the region that is now spilling into the rest of the world, the issue of terrorism as a detriment in the way of democracy, the rise of institutions. What happens in a situation like that? What sort of analysis do you make when terrorism is an interruption of any plan, any five-year plan, and when you have basically a race against democracy? By the way, people confiscate democracy in a one man, one vote, once sort of elections. Mr. Ilyasin, would you be my first responsive to that?
Well, I'll be pretty brief on this. Of course, all acts of terrorism are meant to instill fear and insecurity in a society. And when you have fear and insecurity, you also undermine the morale of institutions. I have met people in different parts of the world who are afraid of their own families, even their own survival, fighting corruption or fighting terrorist threats. And we should be aware of that one of the elements, I think, of the goal of this growing danger is to instill this fear factor. And by that, provoking democratic societies to take steps that sometimes are infringement of what we want to have in our democratic societies. So this is, to me, a huge provocation of a democracy, of the rule of law, and that we should not give in to this fear factor.
Okay.
It's a huge threat, but their whole strategy is to have disruption and fear, and from that, take the next step to increase their power.
Mr. Minister, you want to say something, it seems?
I totally concur with what Jan said. Maybe add that the most effective way of mitigating the risk and mitigating the basis for terrorism and extremism in the future is a successful not only outcome of the SDGs, but the implementation of the SDGs. When we know that there are hundreds of millions of young people without work globally, we know only in the Arab world there needs to be created 70 million new jobs by 2020. These are the challenges that we have to take seriously. We can not fight terrorism without also in parallel address very fundamental issues like inclusive growth that should be both sustainable and job creating. But I also have to add that on Friday in the Security Council meeting that was called by Secretary Kerry, I, for the first time in a long time in that context, saw a very clear silver lining, because on treating or addressing terrorism or extremism in Iraq, you have seen now another way of handling it than we have seen in the recent years. First was inclusive government where moderate Sunnis are included. Then whole the Arab world and the GCC countries came together and supported it. And then we had the Security Council where all the permanent members agreed on Friday on action. Isn't that something? I wish that could also spread to the neighboring country, yes.
It's a shame that it takes that sort of danger to unify them rather than getting unified earlier on on policies that were needed to treat the situation before terrorism came to grow so hard and so bad. Mr. Mrs. Karamani, why is the issue of corruption so stubborn in Africa and in the Middle East and in the Third World? Why on earth can't we get it in terms of governance? Why is bribery such a norm? What to do about it?
I'm not sure about the actual cure, but the root cause, I think, is two people. First, the one who bribes, because if we didn't have anybody bribing, there shouldn't be any corruption. But more importantly for us, the person who accepts the bribe, we should examine that one. Why would anybody, in the execution of their job, want to be bribed to do something which is not according to the rules? Is it because they are poor? Is it because they want to get rich quickly? I think there's basically a lack of upbringing. You are brought up in a situation where your values really are deficient. The pride that you are working for a company or your government, and for the return from that government for the people. It needs a bit of training. I don't think we are going to find an easy answer unless we can deal with both. Punishment, yes, but I've seen punishment being meted out and yet corruption continuing. So we need to deal with both sides.
Could I add something
Yes.
here? Before I have to leave in about 10 minutes, so I will take part in whatever other discussion you want to have. But I want to take this opportunity to say that I think for all of us, and I think this room is all in favor of strengthening rule of law, I think we need to be more concrete. The word rule of law has unfortunately become a more controversial term than I ever expected in the negotiations. I think we have to move from that rubric to what you said, Ragida, very concrete issues like anti-corruption, strengthening of legal institutions, the right to an identity, land rights, all these concrete aspects which should unite member states, the whole membership. So I think we need to be, as I said, more concrete in the negotiations ahead, because to many rule of law is a very generic, very general term, but let's point to the fact that hundreds of millions of people don't exist, don't have any birth certificates, or you go in a village and you can't even know whether they don't know their birthdays. There are no papers. There are 12 million stateless. So I think get down to what this really means. I know my own society, Sweden, you couldn't believe it. It was one of the poorest countries in Europe back in the 20s. And I asked my father, who was a labor union leader, when I was the first one to graduate even from high school in my family. I asked him, what was it that brought Sweden from poverty to what we are now? And he said 3 things, my son. We built infrastructure in the 30s, which gave jobs. We developed a fair education system, and you are the product of that. And thirdly, we built up strong and honest institutions that we trusted. And he told me that in those days, you could even win an election on raising taxes. It's not possible today, I think. But anyway, and of course you can't say it's Sweden and then I use that as a parallel to Africa. I mean, I sometimes warn you about that. But I say it is absolutely crucial to make the document that we will finally conclude be not a document of rhetoric, but one of realities. And I think rule of law, if we go to the concrete road, can provide lots of great examples.
Let me ask you, Bob, on this. Let me take this further. We pride ourselves, particularly the culture at the UN now, is to say we are working for ending impunity. But the mechanisms of transparency, the mechanisms of accountability, I'm not so very aware of mechanisms in place for such accountability, to monitor, to hold responsible. Is there something that can be done on this in order to respond to that #1 priority that the survey said? They said, as you correctly pointed out, that they want an honest and responsive government. An honest and responsive government has got to be scrutinized. do you think it's a good idea of thinking of mechanisms, international mechanisms, for accomplishing that and bringing people to normality?
I think this starts with the nation state and the domestic. And there are good examples of countries that have gone from being very poor to becoming middle income countries. And if we look at those countries, I think the rule of law and the transparency is one of many important components. But I think it's also a prerequisite, as Jan was saying. Norway and Sweden were 100 years ago, together with Ireland and Iceland, the poorest countries in Europe. And there is not everything that can be replicated, but I think we take it in our societies as kind of a priori that if you go to the court or if you go to the police or if you go to a ministry, you will be treated fairly, and bribes is not part of it. But how can you create such a system where you don't have the critical mass? You know, if you don't have a middle class, you have an elite and very poor people. I think this is part of a very complex answer, and it has to be not addressed in a condescending way. It has to be addressed in a very in a partnership way, and that's what I mean also with SDGs. We need to get this right. Why is there hesitance to bring in good governance in the SDGs? I think we need to have we need to analyze that and build on that. We will have to try in the spring to get in concrete goals, but also maybe on the financing side, look at that. For example, what we have launched in Norway is that we have tax for development. We do have tax people that can be partnering with the developing country to build the capacity. We have oil for development, where we share the way we have built our oil system, so we know that the governmental rent, that one belongs to the people, not to the politicians or other senior people in the country. This needs to be spent on the people. So this kind of capacity building that we maybe are also willing to then finance is one way.
Minister Schiremani, before I let Jan Eliasson leave, because I promised I'd let him leave in about 5 more minutes, do you think that in the third world, in the developing world, we are not able to build this process that the Minister of Norway was talking about? Is something like, do we need another process, or have we just failed in understanding this process? And I'd like you to be honest about that and tell me what on earth has happened. Why is it taking us so much longer?
I think we can and we should. In my own country, I have been signing pieces of paper, probably amounting to 1 million pula, 2 million. I've never seen that million. It's a piece of paper. It goes through a system where it's checked by somebody else. As a minister, I have no control over any money, anywhere, except in Parliament. I'm insulted in Parliament for asking for too much money, and then it goes to the public servant who does the expenditure. I don't touch it. I don't know where it is. The report comes to me, and then I have to account, although I'm not the accounting officer. I account to Parliament what has happened to the money. So there's an accounting system. The revenues, the government revenues, go to an account, and there's a redistribution from that account. So our mineral revenue don't go to an individual, but to a central account for redistribution, so that everybody, in terms of need, in terms of the plan, will get something. So it is possible, madam.
Thank you then. Mr. Al-Yassin, I'm going to ask you to stay for a couple of minutes because our host, the Secretary General of International IDEA, Mr. Yves Le Terme, would like to take the floor to make a comment on this. Please go ahead.
No, thank you very much, madam, and I won't hold you longer than a couple of minutes here, Mr. Eliasson. I appreciate very much that you came to this place. Just to add what I missed until now, but I'm sure that it is also perceived as such by the colleagues in the panel, but from my personal experience in active politics and also based on what we prepare at the International IDEA, the bottom-up approach. This is really crucial, that you have the investment by authorities in capacitating people to make on their own the assessment, individually or in group, of how accountability is organized. And I won't make a long advertisement here, but we develop tools at International IDEA, but capacitating people, investing in their training, inform them about what's happening, and then I think bottom up there will be a dynamism towards asking also for more accountability. So I think it's very good that at the UN and on the level of the national governments and regional institutions, we put this in the center of the attention. But a very important part is having the courage to capacitate the people themselves to have a dynamism bottom up to hold the leaders accountable on the basis of good information and organizing, giving the tools to the citizens to hold them for accountable, the leaders.
Thank you very much. As promised, you may say what you want.
No, I agree 100%. I told you about millions of people being consulted during the process of developing the contributions from the Secretary General to the member states. But equally, we need to be very much focused on anchoring our work in the countries. These goals are not a global negotiation only. They are also a national concern, and indeed they're often a local concern. And you made mention, Ragida, to the big demonstration yesterday. We need to connect to the people. We need to connect to different people's movements. This has to be living realities. If we come up with a set of goals next year, which are not, there is no sense of ownership in a wider group of society, not only in governments, where, by the way, finance ministers, energy ministers, agriculture ministers, industry ministers need to be also informed by these goals, but also the private sector, civil society, activist groups, the academic world. There has to be mobilization around these goals so that when they are up there, they're going to be known around the world. We have an ambition that every human being will know about these goals once we do them. And I really believe in the charter. The charter's first three words, remember them? We the peoples. Even if we are an intergovernmental organization, we the peoples they created this organization, and we are accountable to the peoples. They need to live in peace. They need to have development. They need to have respect for human rights. And that's where we are accountable. I know Amina and Irene and Yves will say more in the next phase of this and be more concrete than I am, but there's a lot of will from the Secretary on my side to really make this a hugely important, daunting, but yet inspiring task to set the goals right for the next generation. And we should be ambitious and not get into a trade-off negotiation or lowest common denominator. Transformative changes is needed, and look around the world how much it's needed. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Eliasson. Please join me in thanking. All right.
Very fast. No, I don't need to run. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All of you.
As usual.
Thank you.
I'm going to say something. Watch me. I'm going to suggest just have my other one. You're staying, right? No. I'd love to leave as well. Okay. So here, one more time, there's just some. Please join me in thanking the Foreign Minister of Norway. I did not know he's leaving. The Deputy Minister will be right here joining me. So now I'm going to become Jan Eliasson for a minute. All right, there we are. And then just so that I could moderate this a little better. May I then get your attention again, please? This is really an exciting conversation, and I'm honored to be moderating it. Thank you for your patience with this impromptu changes. So let me introduce properly Mr. Yves Latin so that he could take the floor next. He's Secretary General of International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance since June 2014. He previously served as Deputy Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. He has previously held political positions in Belgium, including Minister of Foreign Affairs and Prime Minister. It's an honor to have you with us. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like, on behalf of International IDEA, the Bureau here in New York with Massimo Tomazzoli, I would like to thank all participants in the panel and all you that are present here for joining us this morning. The aim of today's meeting is in fact to exchange of our views about the subject of the post-2015 goals, to share experiences, and that's the reason why I will be quite short to have enough time to have this exchange of ideas. The various processes we had until now, the debates demanding also the people what their opinion was, have kind of focused now on the concept of sustainable development. Well, I've always learned that sustainable development is a little bit like a car or a chair. You need 4 wheels to drive a car, and so sustainable development is of course about economic development, which is key, social development, social compact, environmental issues, but it's also about governance. And when you don't estimate enough the importance of governance, you can try to start, and your car on 3 wheels maybe makes a start, but to be sustainable, development needs a car with 4 wheels, including the governance and democracy and rule of law issue. For the people that are more environmentalists, I would say it's like a chair with 4 legs. If you forget 1 leg, you will be able to do some acrobacies, but it won't last. So, ladies and gentlemen, there can be, to our opinion, no sustainable development, and there should be no post-2015 goals without governance, without rule of law, and without human rights formulated as it can be in a kind of compromise, of course, in the goals that will be decided next year. At the same time, of course, democracy, rule of law, and human rights are ends in their own, in addition to being enablers of development. And this is true for all countries in the world. It's not only a North-South debate in one direction, it's for all countries in the world, irrespective of their particular development situation or special circumstances, including those related, of course, to, and reference was made to them, to post-conflict recovery countries. And the relevance, once again, of these concepts for sustainable development, the concepts of governance and rule of law, is not only for informed scholars or diplomats or human rights advocates. There is really a popular call emerging from social movements, from civil society organizations, and engaged citizens from a wide range of countries and regions. It's also a result of evidence, as was said before, from country-led processes, from at the demand side search, which was made through, for instance, My World 2015. There is also the similar calls for inclusive, responsive, representative, and participatory decision-making accountability echoed during the intergovernmental negotiations, and so on. And they have, until now, let's be fair, albeit only partially, reflected in the outcome document, especially, as you know, under SDG 16. The whole of the endeavor now must be to also in the end document to have a goal which reflects, taking into account the different sensitivities and sensibilities, which reflects this endeavor to improve the rule of law, to improve governance, to improve democracy as a development enabler and as a value at its own. Let's now turn to conclude at the relevance of democratic accountability in the new framework. There is, and this is also from my former experience at the OECD, there is an overwhelming consensus that national policy choices matter for development. And this is why democratic governance has really an essential place in the framing of the post-2015 developments agenda. In fact, indeed, democracy matters for development because it opens up space for citizens to participate. It unleashes talents and it defines the development agenda. Democracy provides also the free flow of information necessary for an economy to develop and for governments to be accountable to their citizens in full transparency. Democracy can facilitate equitable distribution and contributions to society which are essential for sustainable development. In attributes also of democratic governance such as transparency and accountability, they are essential to development processes. With more democracy, you have more chances of sustainable peace, of stability. With better governance, you have less poverty. With better democracy, you have more sustainable development. So let's work together next year, same time, same place, to see drafts which reflects these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When, during the debate, a little later on amongst the panelists, I'd like you very much to address, Mr. Leterme, what I see as a failure of simplifying the language of what you're saying, though it should be so simple, but I feel like it has not become a household item, whether it is governance, whether it is development. It just is a lofty expression for the majority in the world. So I'd like to address that later on during the debate, but it's my honor now to introduce Ms. Irene Khan, Director General of the International Development Law Organization, IDLO. She's been there since January 2012. She was Secretary General of Amnesty International from 2001 until 2009. Prior to that, she worked for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees for 21 years at headquarters and in various field operations. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the organizers, International IDEA, as well as the delegations of Norway and Botswana for giving me this opportunity to address you today. Now, I'll make 3 points. My first point is that the rule of law is integrally linked to democratic governance as well as sustainable development. And by the rule of law, I mean good laws and regulations that are fairly administered by transparent and accountable institutions and that produce fair outcomes for all. It isn't enough just to adopt laws or to set up institutions. Laws can discriminate and exclude the poor, women, minorities. Institutions can be mismanaged and manipulated for the benefit of the privileged. People whose rights are violated can be left without a remedy because the courts are too remote, too expensive, or perhaps even corrupt. So the rule of law, properly understood, and I do emphasize properly understood because that is where a lot of the problem lies, provides not just certainty and predictability of the law, but also substantive justice, equality, accountability, and respect for human rights, both economic, social, and cultural rights, as well as political and civil rights. Equal protection, equal access, equal opportunity, voice, and accountability are so closely linked that for someone who is a practitioner on the ground of law and development, it's extremely difficult to separate the rule of law from sustainable development. Now, my second point is, as the Deputy Secretary General said, we need to take a concrete and evidence-based approach to make our point. Sustainable development is at its core a call to address the injustices created by extreme poverty, inequality, overconsumption, and environmental degradation. My organization, IDLO, is the only multilateral organization exclusively devoted to the rule of law, and we operate in all regions of the world across the spectrum of development, from post-conflict to emerging economies to middle-income countries. And our experience is that, as well as the experience of development actors, our partners and others in the United Nations and outside at the national level, local level, or international level, shows that protecting the planet, eradicating poverty and hunger, fighting inequality, creating more inclusive societies, promoting economic opportunity for all, requires respect for the rule of law and institutions that are transparent. Changes in development fortunes happen only when the poor and the marginalized are empowered to act, to address their causes of their own impoverishment. And how do we empower the poor? Experience shows that the poor are empowered through information, participation, access to justice. The Secretary General of International IDEA talked about the bottom-up approach. In International Development Law Organization, we talk about the synergy between the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach. When the two come together, that is when you actually get effective, sustainable development. So bringing the law closer to people is key to promoting sustainable, inclusive development, and democratic governance very often is the way through which law is brought close to people. Now, I do want to make a third point as well.
Yes.
Over the last year, my organization has been very actively engaged in promoting the rule of law as part of the post-2015 development agenda. And one issue that time and time again we have heard come from those who are concerned about the SDGs is, what about the international aspects of the rule of law and good governance? What about those issues that affect trade, investment, intellectual property, technology transfer, and climate change? There are growing demands here too for fairer, more transparent rules and institutions. So properly understood, the purpose of the rule of law is to create a level playing field in communities, at the national level, but also at the international level. Now, there are many concerns, as I've said. These are controversial issues. There is a long road ahead to convince everyone on them, but I don't believe that any of those problems are insurmountable, providing we approach the rule of law in a concrete, proper manner, and we recognize that there are issues at local as well as international level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me introduce now Ms. Amina Mohammed. She's Special Advisor on post-2015 development planning at the United Nations since June 2012. She's the CEO and founder of the Center for Development Policy Solutions, adjunct professor of the Master's Program for Development Practice at Columbia University here in New York, my daughter's alma mater, not mine. Prior to that, Ms. Mohammed served as the Senior Special Assistant to the President of Nigeria on the Millennium Development Goals. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone, Excellencies and colleagues and many friends in the room. I want to also add my appreciation to both the delegations of Botswana and Norway and International IDEA for making this space available for us to really have a conversation about how we protect and respect and move with what we've come out of member state processes, which has been quite incredible over the last 18 months. The GA this year, the context, I think, for this discussion is quite right. We come with many outputs from what member states have discussed over 18 years, the open working group, the financing framework, and then the issue of technologies. But I think so much more importantly that we don't forget that we're having a discussion that opens this afternoon on ICPD. We're having another discussion. This morning we opened another one on indigenous people, and tomorrow we go to climate change, climate justice. So the issues that this should all be an integral part of are out there, and we're pushing the ambitions for them, and this needs to be taken together. I think the member states have set the stage. I think it's quite incredible that we have a goal 16. For those that were not involved, don't know the sleepless nights that many delegations have had and civil society and organizations like Irene in really pushing to to see that if we've got a substantive agenda that's supposed to respond to the challenges that we have in the world, the two things that really need to hold them up, one is Goal 16 and the other is Goal 17. We've got to have governance, the rule of law, and we've got to make that investment in peaceful societies. But we have to have the means, the resources to do it, and also be held accountable for that. So I think that the co-chairmanship from Kenya and from Hungary was really quite incredible in showing us the level to which member states wanted to lead and take ownership. So you try telling any delegation that you're going to take away any one of those 17 elements, and I can assure you that you probably won't leave New York in one piece. They fought hard for them and the 169. But it is a political agenda, and I think we have to keep reinforcing this is not legally binding, this agenda. So it must be as compelling as the MDGs were. We must be able to deliver a message at the country level that our politicians can, as they say in my country, carry go. Take it to the people, deliver on promises, not just make them or try to commit to them, but actually deliver on them. And I think that today, when we really think about many more of the backgrounds that we're in, you talked about terrorism, certainly conflict in its different ways challenge us. Their rights denied. We have an MDG agenda that is unfinished business. Women and children have their rights denied. We have inadequate laws, and certainly the abilities to enforce them. Even when laws are put in place, as we say, the ability to really try and enforce them is still a yawning gap. There's also a need for a common understanding of what we really mean and the consensus for this issue. Many of us take it for granted. I'm hearing here as we speak to democracy, and why isn't we haven't got it? Well, it's easy for those who have it. But I think we have to remember that democracy evolves. It's not something that you can cut and paste. It's not a quick fix. This is something that communities and societies and government and all the institutions you put together have to live through and be responsive and own. And if we don't, it gets rolled back very, very quickly. If you say to an average person in a country that where a democracy is evolving, I'm not sure that they're going to say democracy is such a good thing. They will point to you to all the things that are not so good about it. And if you take that and put it 50, 100 years back in democratic societies that are still working at it at the 100%, they will remember when that was a part of their history as well. So I think we must communicate that. We must also try to respond to that in trying to explain the urgency and the necessity to have democratic institutions and democracy in place. But I think there's no hurry to fail, because then we have to go all the way back again, and that's an expensive journey. And I can tell you, certainly in my country, when I look at the costs of what it takes to keep Parliament in place against the costs that I need to save women's lives, we won't say we don't need democracy, but it's a challenge. Mm-hmm. It's almost a choiceless choice. So I think the transformations that we are looking for in this ambitious agenda certainly won't happen without us having that governance goal. I think it's important when we see that the transformations mean scale. Leaving no one behind means are vulnerable, means those that we can't see, putting in place accountability mechanisms that really make for that transformation. And if we don't have that in place, then of course we're not going to make this happen. I think really important are the partnerships in this. There are new players that are coming into sustainable development. We're speaking about the challenges of Goal 16 almost on the old agenda of the MDGs and a north-south approach of conditionality. This is a much bigger one. It's universal, so look in the mirror. It's accountability at the global and the local level. It has many more players in it than we've had when we say government and civil society. For once, parliaments are going to be challenged. And it's not that they don't have the instruments. In fact, one of the major asks of a parliament is their oversight. And that oversight responsibility, how many parliaments actually carry that out in a way in which you can say that governments are held accountable. And to add to that, they make up the laws. The most important of all laws is the appropriation one, the one that actually puts the resources behind what we talk about now. So the need for that accountability. Newcomers to this, I will have to say business is a big one. We all say we can't do this without business, but we need the checks and balances for that, and that's going to be extremely important. Who else is new to this? Young people. Young people are going to carry this. How do they address what we're speaking about here? How many people in this room would we classify as our youth, as we discuss an incredibly important decision we want to take on a goal that holds us up for the next 15 years. So I think these are some of the things that we are going to be challenged with, carrying them forward in trying to shape what we believe should be ambitious and responsive to these challenges. The Secretary General does have the synthesis report, and I know that we'll have some time to discuss that ambition and the leadership he will take on it.
Thank you very much. allow me to welcome to the discussion the State Secretary and Deputy Minister Hans Bratskar, and he will be carrying on in this now exchange of ideas and exchange of views that will take place amongst the panelists. Massimo, I did not ask you if you wanted me to invite questions from the floor, so I have no idea if I may. I'd like that if possible, and as long as there are short questions and comments. But let me just put right to you right now, the two of you actually, because you raised this question, important issue of youth and the new actors and the new players. Has the social media as an element of what's been going on, has it been a failure or an enhancement of the process of democracy, Mr. Minister? Because the two distinguished ladies spoke of that, the new players. Do you think that the social media has been used properly, has been tapped properly, or has it failed some of the ambitions of democracy and development? I'll start with you, and then I'll invite whoever wants to make a comment.
I don't think the social media has failed. I think it has done probably what it has always done, both the positive and the negative. The positive in the sense that you now know what this young group, the younger generation, what they want, because they can use it. It has also shown that probably we are not as responsive as we ought to be to the needs of the young generation, allowing them to participate as fully as they ought to. I think somewhere we are holding them back, either for fear that they are too young, they don't understand. Governance is a serious issue, so you can't give them too many opportunities. But they have been using it, I think, effectively in some cases. There's some nuisances with this media now. I don't know how to use it, but Skype and all sorts of things.
Yes, you do.
I'm too old for that. But it has worked. It has worked, yeah. Communication.
Mr. Minister?
Thank you. It's the use of social media. I think it's an extremely challenging but important issue, and we've certainly seen over the last few years that it's been a tool for both good and unfortunately for evil. We see in some countries that it's used to mobilize support for terrorism and extreme acts. On the other hand, it has been already, as we have seen in many countries, a tool where especially young people have been able to get together and use social media to create real change. And I think we're going to see much more of that in years to come. But if we get this right, it can be a way that we, both governments and international organizations and others, can help build trust between the state and the people the state serves. Because, of course, the challenge that we have with good governance and the rule of law is that in many countries, unfortunately, there's a lack of trust in the state, and for very good reasons. Social media can provide a platform for increasing such trust in years to come. If we can use it to engage local leaders and religious leaders in a way to transmit information that they can use in their communities. And I think that just one concrete example of where this could be useful is we see the horrible threat of Ebola in several countries. These are countries where, for good reasons, that have been through civil strife and civil war for many years, and where people simply are not used to trusting their government, or the government institutions are weak. If we can use social media in a new way to engage those people who have to be engaged in fighting this terrible disease, and again, local leaders and religious leaders are key for that, then I think it can be a tool for tremendous good. But we are not there yet where we know how to use this sophisticated instrument in a way that can serve and benefit people.
Can I go with first names?
Yes.
Okay, Yves, it's yours.
Yeah, 1 minute, because I think it's important to give the floor to the audience. First of all, I think it's technically a good tool to organize democracy, elections, and also referenda and so on, direct democracy. But I think there are 4 characteristics at least which are important in a democracy that are quite difficult sometimes to organize in social media, because it's instant democracy. It's first reaction, it's very speedy reaction on something that's happening or an idea that is launched. So there's sometimes a lack for enough time for good information, for reflection, for a real exchange of views. This is sometimes lacking in social media. And last but not least, equality. Sometimes the less catchy ideas get not that exposure and are endangered by the instant reaction in social media. But besides that, I think there are a lot of, and I agree with what was said before, there are a lot of advantages to by introducing through introducing social media in organizing democracy.
Excellent. Amina?
I think, like with any tool, there's a good way to use it and not such a good way to use it. And if you put the checks and balances in, then we can, deal with, okay, this is about, let's put that to one side. But the good of social media and the way in which young people today are able to use this to cross borders, to bring barriers down, to connect each other across a universal agenda is incredible. When we first went out on the My World to ask everyone what was the world they wanted to see, and everyone said, this is very elite, not every young person has access to social media. But what we saw was young people take social media to those that didn't have it and allow them to use it. So I think, it's really got a binding force for good, and that's what we need to fuel and encourage. I'll say the other thing that it's done as well for elections, while we're talking about democracy, is that using social media to give feedback from elections in real time. I think this has reduced corruption, has brought more faith in the electoral system, but has also put pressure on the electoral system and politicians to know that someone's looking over their shoulder and can report back.
Excellent. Did you want to say anything, Irene, on this? Or no? Or so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take 5 questions, please, if you don't mind. Unless you have a comment, then it has to be very short. And both the questions or the comment has to be short. Please introduce yourself. If you have one person on the panel here that you want to answer, then you just tell me, specify that, and I will start right here, please. The 2 of you next to each other. 3 and 4, and I'll take 1 more. 5. Okay.
My name is Shazia Rafi. I'm former Secretary General of Parliamentarians for Global Action with Global Parliamentary Services now. I want to ask Minister Skelemani and also those who have served in Parliament, Mr. Leterme, and I believe the Deputy Minister perhaps, to bring the attention back to the issue of where the ground up and the bottom down meets, which is in the legislature. And the legislature is an institution which still globally needs quite a lot of strengthening and capacity building. The minister alluded to it when he talked about the fact that he has to answer questions in Parliament, and yet he himself does not have sometimes within his ministry the information given to him on how the funding is being spent. Very few legislatures have independent research services. So in a sense, it means more allocation of funding for enhancing the capacity of the legislature to be the supervisory accountability mechanism that you need for development. So I'd like, for that to be answered by
Thank you, Shazi. I'm going to wait for the answers till I collect the 5 questions with your permission. Sir, identify yourself, please.
My name is Esfai Qureshi. I'm the former Chief Election Commissioner of India. I'm on the board of International IDEA. It's a very good topic you've raised about social media. I think all you need to do is study the latest elections in India. They were greatly influenced by social media. And although the internet access is just about 20%, and 160 of 543 constituency have 20% access. So it is 20 and another 20. And the assessment is that social media can influence 3 to 4% swing. It's a lot, because we have seen in the past that even 1 to 2% swing can make all the difference. But at the same time, the party which came to power, internet played a great role. They knew how to use social media and they got the dividend. But it can be manipulative because there can be organized groups, what is now famously known as trolls, who are on the prowl, will just start an orchestrated attack, and you feel that they are really representative of the people. And secondly, since there's still 20% or 25%, majority of the people do not have access, so it doesn't really represent their voice.
Okay. Thank you. So I think this is a comment, not a question to anybody. Thank you for your comment, sir.
Thank you. My name is Frédéric Bontin. I'm Director for Development and Global Public Goods in the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And as such, I took part in the Open Working Group. And as some of you said, we have been able to reach a kind of global consensus in the Open Working Group, including Goal 16 on governance. And we have a lot of very positive things in that goal, even if we were not able to include all the things that we wanted to see in the post-2015 agenda from a French perspective. So my question is, and maybe it's more a question for Mrs. Amina Mohamed, what do you think that at that point our ambitions should be? Is it just to preserve this balance that we have been able to reach, or to go even further and to try to include a more ambitious view on rule of law, governance, and democracy? And if so, how can we do it? How can we build confidence? How can we reduce the kind of reluctance that we have seen from some countries regarding this very delicate issue? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. To the back there, yes, kindly stand up so that I could see you. There you are. Please kindly.
Hello, my name is Priya Sood. I'm representing the Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption. We are a membership-based organization of parliamentarians, current and former, and our members have mandated us to pursue the creation of an international anti-corruption court. I look to Ms. Khan as well as others to respond to that and see. I realize it's a very ambitious goal, but I would look forward to putting more concrete thoughts out there on how we can prosecute those that have committed acts of grand corruption. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, my last, for this round, I may have time for another round. So let me take 5 at a time, and I think I will have time for another round. So please, the young lady there.
Thank you very much for this very timely and very important event, and this issue which is crucial for the achievement of the future sustainable development goals, as all have already agreed. My question goes to Norway and Botswana for their role in convincing the other member states on this objective of integrating goal on governance and democracy combined with the equality goal as some of those most critical to the achievements of the future sustainable development goals. We have all the lessons from the MDGs that the inequality is one of these aspects that is tremendously preventing us from achieving the goals, and it's a key to achievement of all the other 17 goals, in a sense, having both the governance and the equality represented strongly. Okay. So I will echo to the French speaker just before, how can we level the ambitions and work in all regions of the world toward this?
So let me take this in reverse, actually. Let me start with you. Amina, with the question that came to you about Goal 16 and what should our ambition be, to preserve, persevere, or to go further, and how? So this is the gentleman from the Quai d'Orsay. Please, you start with that, if you don't mind.
I think by my nature and the needs that the world has today, you have to keep pushing ambition. I mean, if you don't, then we'll come down to the lowest common denominator. So, it's not over yet, and it's not over until it's over. So we keep going, and as Nelson Mandela said, it seems impossible until it's possible. So I think we should never shy away from that. But there is a fine line that we need to negotiate here, and that's one that allows us to keep that ambition or shuts the door. And I think you have to know that in the room with member states, that how close you get to sometimes around language, you get a door shut, when in fact you've got so much there that you could take down. For the very first time, we're looking at a goal on governance. We've not had that before. It's not mainstreamed, it is a goal. And at the end of the day, it is what countries make of it. You can have all the ambition in the world, but a country can decide also, when it comes to implement, to go to that lowest common denominator. I hope that what we can get is the highest ambition. I hope that the goal remains. I think that without it, we will not have that transformative agenda. But I also hope that we will be able to, in the course of next year, develop indicators that will reinforce a lot of these goals and targets that we'll be putting in place. The second thing I think that needs to happen is that we need to open up spaces where we can have honest discussions on reducing the mistrust between those who are all for the ambition and those who are nervous and distrusted. And I think that's what we have to, the elephant in the room often, that's the elephant that needs to be discussed. And I think if we can have more spaces like this where we can have that robust discussion. I think last and not least, we've got to allow what we are speaking about now to connect with the country and show the implications of this in the country and hear the country voice back. Right now it's about transmission. I am just hearing here when we say, well, we want to transmit messages through social media to certain constituencies. What about hearing back from them? Let's not make the same mistake that we said the UN system had done in 2000 in prescribing, and all we've done now is shifted the pen to member states to prescribe from New York. Let's actually really see that connection with capitals, and that this makes sense. So when I go home next year, I can hit the ground running and no one will say to me, so what is this that you brought down, and question me for the next 5 years on how to implement it.
Excellent. I think you're right. Can I ask you to address the question addressed to you, Ms. Khan, from the parliamentarian? And anything else you want to add, in fact, if you have another observation?
Thank you. On the issue of a court for anti-corruption, I don't think this is a question about building more and more institutions. It's actually making the institutions work better. We do have the standards, we do have the principles, we do have the law, both nationally and internationally in many cases. It's making them work better. And that is why investing in the court system, but corruption is not an issue for courts. Corruption is actually an issue for people, and therefore strengthening the power of people to hold their leaders to account, whether it's at the local level, village councils, or local urban town councils, or going up to the national systems, going into the media, and so on. And this is where development, rights, and justice are very closely linked. There is a tendency for us to silo them, because we are working in a system, by nature, a document that has to have goals. The tendency is to forget and only focus on one goal. One needs to look at the relationships of how you can use one issue. I think someone talked about equality. How do you use the equality goal to push democracy? How do you use other issues to push, for example, greater integrity systems? So I think it's not about creating new institutions. I totally agree with Amina about the need to keep pushing. I would also underline the need to read beyond language. I think there is a tendency to believe that if you do not recognize the term rule of law, therefore it does not exist, it won't happen. But one can look at access to justice, one can look at other rights language in the whole document to see what is actually going to come out. And finally, I would say that the issue is not so much of about siloing democracy and development, it's about linking them up. So social media, we've talked a lot about social media for elections. We should be talking about social media for healthcare, for education, for environmental protection, because that will make governments realize that we are talking about governance in concrete development outcomes and not in ideological terms. That's very, very important to reassure those who feel that this is something else through the back door. This is about development, this is about fair outcomes. And providing you stay focused on that, then I think you can go very far with Goal 16.
Okay, great. Shazia asked a question of the three gentlemen, the first question that was asked, and actually the last one was also linked to a couple of them. So I will go this way, and then I'll end up by my next door, distinguished minister. Yves?
Just a couple of words about the parliamentary system. A question that was asked about how it's positioned. I think it's, as a matter of fact, we have lots of challenges to the parliamentary system. If we look at who is today, I've been myself 15 or 70 years in different parliaments, who is today a member of parliament, this is not the average citizen. and it should be. Of course, it's difficult. You need, because of the complexity of the matters that are discussed and so on. But for instance, in terms of who's a member of parliament, don't underestimate in some democracies, for instance, this democracy, the United States, the capture of politics by the powers of money. In lots of democracies, for instance, in the American democracy, you have to be a good fundraiser. And in reading newspapers, you read about the fundraising capacity of members of parliament that in the parties are positioned well on lists or given circumscriptions, constituencies, because they can raise money. What has this to do with drafting good laws and defending the general interest of people? There's also, I think, an increasing lack of programmatic debate because the media, we have been talking about social media, but also the other kind of media now that influence people when it comes up to make their choice at parliamentary elections. The campaigning is so fixed, is so focused on personalities that the programmatic debate, there is the problem of the role of members of parliament between elections. There is, for instance, also the role of what Philip Cogan calls in his book, The Last Vote, a very interesting book, the double or triple delegation. You vote for someone in your place who's a candidate in your constituency, and then the Sunday evening you see party leaders that gather to form a government and technocrats that write coalition agreements. These coalitions make it very difficult to still see what it is about and what the precise ideas, where the precise ideas are that you voted for. And so the distance and the misunderstanding, the lack of understanding of population is growing through this kind of complexity. So there is a lot of work to do. We, at International IDEA, we've published recently, for instance, concerning the capture of politics by money, a handbook about financing of politics. I think it's on the table. You can take a copy if you want. We've have some proposals to enhance or strengthen the programmatic capacity of political parties. So the parliamentary system was invented a very long time ago. If we still want to give it the way it needs to have, because it's the expression of the will of the population of people, we have to work on it, and there's a lot of work to do to strengthen its position.
Thank you, Hans.
Thank you. Let me just say on this issue that he was talking about, and I totally agree with him, that the role of Parliament, unfortunately, in many countries has gone from being less of a watchdog function to becoming more of a way to share the spoils, so to speak. I mean, it's an issue of personalities, yes, but it's also an issue of money in many ways. It's a very harmful development, of course, and we're very glad to be able to work with IDEA and the Oslo Center and others to try to change that. But it's very much an ingrained problem in many countries where elections are seen as a zero-sum game rather than a way to have a policy debate that can be helpful for development. On the issue of good governance and equality, I think that, and how can we convince other governments that the issue of good governance and rule of law are important for the Sustainable Development Goals? I think that we have to do that in several ways. One is to present good governance and the rule of law not as something that is harmful for development, but is really a development choice. And this is something that we have seen in every country, that if you want development that can actually benefit the people at large, you need to have good governance and the rule of law. And both my foreign minister and Jan Eliasson talked about that in our own countries, where this has certainly been the basis for Sweden and Norway's rapid development. At the same time, we need to, on the issue of both good governance but also on equality, we have to link it up to the issues that we will see in the next 12 to 15 months, where we will have important debates on both financing for development and financing for combating climate change. So we, in the wealthy part of the world, need to confirm that we will keep ODA at a high level, or increase ODA, I should say, for many countries. We have to have ambitious targets on financing for development and financing for combating climate change, and we have to be able to prove that in the next 12 to 15 months. Excuse me. At the same time, this is very much a partnership where also developing countries have to lay a framework for encouraging investments and trade. It's not high taxes that often scare away investments, although maybe too high taxes do so. But it's much more a lack of sense of stability. Local businesses, international businesses need stable framework for investments, and that will include the rule of law, property rights, land rights, legal identity, and good market regulations. That will encourage investments, and that will also promote the possibility of reducing poverty in any and every country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with what my colleagues have said. Parliamentary democracy is very difficult, sometimes annoying, because your parliamentarians, the way they are chosen, and they are supposed to be representative of the people. You look at any society, and you look at the parliamentarians, they appear to be a distinct group. They are not your average citizen. And you wonder whether they really can articulate what the average citizen feels or sees. As they said, because one, when you start electioneering, if you have no money and you've got to travel and crisscross probably sandy areas, or it's a rainy season, I mean, I'm going to buy a 4x4 and you can't walk and follow me. So I'm going to be seeing more people than you, and I'll get elected. And yet, probably you got more brains than me. So you see, I get to Parliament not because I'm the best person from that society who understands it best. So you get that kind of mismatch. But
You have the vehicle.
yeah, because I'm richer than the next person. But parliamentary democracy also means that when you get to Parliament, depending on what the elected has said, as I said, you could then find that you are forced into a coalition. So what you said you stand for, you might not be able to push in Parliament because you compromise. And it's a give and take. But where you have the majority, of course you can implement. But the question Madam asked, it's because, like here, my mission here in New York has funds which they are spending. I don't know how much they are spending, on what they are spending it. I'll only know at the end when the Auditor General has examined the books and there's a query. And of course in Parliament, they don't appear in Parliament. I mean, they want to be insulted. That you waste money, you do all sorts of things, and I'm going to answer. I can't say, no, it's my ambassador who did this. It's my responsibility. I'm going to answer for that. So I'm going to keep a relationship with my officers, and there's going to be a proper communication between us. So trust between the officers and me. How do we teach others? Well, what we have done in practice in our part of the world, we've been asked, and I was fortunate with one of my colleagues to have been asked through the Commonwealth to go to several, in fact 2 of our neighbors, to go and talk to the cabinets and their permanent secretaries on how to run a proper executive. The reason was simply that the Commonwealth and those countries had seen how Botswana was running things, and they believed that we could share. So in that way, in a small way, we contributed. But it's because we were consistent in what we're doing. And we were observed by others, and they thought, well, that's a good way of doing things. They seem to be accountable. You can trace. If we get the ODA from Norway, we will account for every dollar that comes to us. They can trace it, whether to a clinic or anywhere. And so we are accountable, and we were asked to show the others. That way we can help. I thank you.
Thank you. So listen, here's what's going to happen now. I see there's still interest, and I'm supposed to keep the session going till 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if there is an interest in asking questions. And can I see? Okay, there's a few. So in that case, Mr. Hans, Deputy Minister, Mr. Hans, sorry, I just have to look at the card again. Bratskar may have to leave us, so I will ask you to thank him, and then we still have another 15 minutes to take comments. And again, introduce yourself, be precise, and then we'll have one-liners from everybody. Can you stay for the one-liner or not? No? Okay. Well, look, for those who have to leave the panel, please go ahead and thank you. Please help me thank them for those who have to leave the panel. I still have 3 most distinguished panelists. So I will take the question here first. Yes, microphone, please. I have lots of interest, so it's great.
I just have a comment.
Yourself,
my name is Adel Abdulatif from UNDP. I have a comment on not on the concept, only on the process. Because as we know, in the last Millennium Declaration and the roadmap of the Secretary General, there was a reference already to human rights, governance, and democracy. The Secretary General, the former Secretary General, in his report, in fact, he put some goals on human rights, democracy, and good governance. But he came, of course, in the annex and put the Millennium Development Goals, the 8 goals, where you don't have any reference to governance or human rights. I wonder how in the new process, how governance or human rights will be reflected as one of the goals, particularly that in 2006 we have the Human Rights Council came, and 2003 there is the Anti-Corruption Convention that is part of the UN system. How this will be integrated in the new process.
This is for the panel? Okay, because the panel will have to do a concluding sort of a 2-liners at the end, so I'm going to combine you, sum up, and the questions. The lady all the way in the back, and then the lady in the orange.
Hi, my name is Anne-Marie Goetz. I'm from NYU Center for Global Affairs. I had 2 points to make. One is that concepts like transparency are very abstract, and it seems to me that in Goal 16 of the Open Working Group, an opportunity was missed to be very precise about how to address corruption and transparency, which is, of course, to encourage the adoption of a right to information. The high-level panel actually had this as one of its goals and one of its target areas very distinctly. So something like advancing a right to information around the world would help address this. And do you think it's possible that this could be adopted even under the indicators?
Okay,
the second point was that I think that it's surprising how under Goal Area 16 there's been a failure to link governance to the challenge of sustainable development in the concrete sense that strong states that are high capacity are needed to tackle environmental problems because of technological and environmental costs as well as political and cultural costs. Everybody knows tackling environmental problems is a countercultural issue. It challenges ways of doing things. Strong high-capacity states are needed. Strong states have been eroded with 30 years plus of structural adjustment and good governance reforms. So what is going to be done to build high-capacity states that can work democratically to build a political consensus for change?
Thank you very much. The lady in the orange. And then, I don't know, let me see who else wants. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Ellen Alwadi. I work for the United Nations Secretariat. I have a question to the Minister Skelemani. It became quite apparent in the negotiations in the Open Working Group that the positions were not falling, as it often is happening in the United Nations here in New York, into lines of North-South or G77 versus the West or whatever. It's very clear that there are many countries that have a sort of a common cause in terms of believing that good governance, democracy and the rule of law should be part of the new transformative agenda. I would be curious as to your experience, for example, within Africa in terms of how the various countries were negotiating and what your experiences with other governments that were not so much in favor or that are in favor but then have seen also quite some pressure from other bigger countries that this should not be part of the agenda. So something about the dynamics within the negotiations would be very interesting.
Thank you. The gentleman with the glasses, please. Yeah, raise your hand.
Thank you so much. My name is Leonichenko Sergey. I'm from the Russian mission to the UN. And I represent a younger generation, so I was quite interested in the social media issue which was debated. So I would like to ask the panelists about, well, this issue has been addressed as if it was a neutral method of information used by people for good or used by people for evil. But I would like to ask about one concrete example, a topic vividly debated in many countries around the world. I mean, Facebook, one of the largest networks, it conducted an experiment when it tried to manipulate the mood of its users. It actually conducted this experiment without consent of users on a large scale, like several thousands of them, or maybe hundreds of thousands, we never know. So in this case, if these means of information are privately owned by people with their own interests who try to conduct such experiments in humans, can we really think that these can be reflective of general public's opinion indeed and helpful? Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any, did I miss somebody or am I fair to all? Okay, I think I've been fair to all. So how do we, who wants to be first on this one? Would you like to take the floor first?
Thank you. Well, let me start with the point about how the negotiations are actually cutting across well-known boundaries or lines in the UN system. We have been, as I said, my organization has been working very closely on this issue. And we are a multilateral organization outside the UN with observer status in the UN with membership from all regions of the world. And what we've actually found that when it comes to discussing rule of law and good governance, it's not the old West versus the rest issue. It's actually about showing results and what's happening on the ground. And if I can make a plug for one report that you will find outside, which my organization prepared, which actually records in a very concrete way examples from around the world about the importance of the rule of law to development. And we found through that kind of a discussion that we could engage even with those delegations who were making the most negative statements on the floor of the UN, that we could engage with them outside to show concrete results. So I think that's made a qualitative difference to this debate by bringing in the data. And one of the good results of the Millennium Development Goals was that it provides now the data to argue, to show where difference has been made and where difference hasn't been made. There was another question about how do you build a high-capacity state to deal with the environmental problems. I think this is a very important issue. There is, of course, and quite rightly so, a lot of emphasis on building the bottom up, people's power, empowerment. Even my organization works very strongly and intensively on the issue of legal empowerment strategies. But we need to remember that if we only emphasize the bottom up, we create a great deal of frustration. And we have seen that kind of bubbling up of anger of the people, but on the other side, no response. So clearly, a lot more investment has to be made on building the capacity of state institutions. And I hope that in this SDG agenda, there will be resources and recognition of the importance of institutional development. Then there was a question about the Millennium Development Goals did not reflect human rights, nor corruption issues. Why is it going to be different now and how? As Amina was passing, she asked me to share a point with all of you, because she knows that she and I fully agree on that point, corruption is not the monopoly only of developing countries. I think we need to keep that in mind. And I've had some sympathy, I think, for the foreign minister of Botswana as he's had to deal with these issues as though there is no corruption in other parts of the world. There is a greater consciousness about both the level of people's expectation from governments as well as people's claim to rights around the world. I think people have become much more aware of these issues than they were 10, 15 years ago. And that is why there is the pressure on all sides of this debate about putting a stronger emphasis on human rights and good governance. It shouldn't be seen, again, as an issue for only developing countries. One of the key messages that has come through is that these goals are universal. The SDGs have to be universal goals applicable to all countries of the world. And I think it's that kind of awareness that is creating a qualitative difference in the debate this year as opposed to some 14 or 15 years ago. And that is why I believe that this time around, governments, no matter from what region of the world, just won't get away with ignoring the issue of human rights, good governance, rule of law, and democracy.
Thank you very much. I have 5 minutes to closing, and I have 2 persons. So, Mr. Minister, please, 2 minutes as a sum up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
The issue of how do we build consensus on sustainable development? Well, if you look at Rio Plus 20, you will see that we suddenly differ because some countries think that their responsibility for what we are causing as pollution is to be borne by other people. And yet we agree that we should do sustainable development. How do you get consensus on such a matter? Self-interest takes over. And so we are going to differ. I don't know for how long, but I'm afraid we are going to differ. Good governance, how do countries debate this one? Countries, of course, are informed by their own priorities in any debate. And that's when you get the shocker that, but I thought we are all agreed on what good governance is. Until you get practical. Then you discover that, there's no agreement except for the word, good governance. Practically, they're talking totally different things because of self-interest. That's what governments sometimes do. As for the social media, I said, it's good, it's bad. That is what we expect in a democracy. The good and the bad go together. The hope is the majority who believe in the good are going to prevail. That is democracy. You can't expect that social media will all be good. It just can't be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. And let me tell you, it is now, I'm going to be turning the final word to Yves because he's our host, as I said earlier. So I want you to first join me in thanking first Amina and Mr. Skelemani, and then I meant Irene, I beg your pardon, Irene. And then I want to thank Massimo for choosing me to moderate this wonderful panel. I learned a lot in the last couple of hours. I hope I did not bore you, or hope that you enjoyed it. And I thank you very much for your confidence in me, for leaving this task in my hands. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam. I won't answer the questions because I think lots of things have already been said. Let me just thank you, Madam Chair, Moderator, Madam Rachida Dergam. I hope I pronounce it not too bad. Thank you very much for your excellent work. And ladies and gentlemen, just 1 minute to underline that we are basically the only intergovernmental organization working on a global level on strengthening democracy, but we are also only of added value if we show added value and if we are used by the citizens of the planet. So visit our website, idea.int, and use our documents, our reports. They are made for you. They are available there, and I see that there is something else available too. It has been noon, so please use also or take benefit of the sandwiches and others that are offered there. Thank you very much for your presence, and thank you, Madam, for